I think so.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our August 18th webinar of Demystifying Direct Mail. We are just going to give everybody a minute or two to log on, and then we will go ahead and get started in about a minute. Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining us today. I'm Amy Wong and I'm president of .org Solutions. We are a nonprofit marketing and fundraising consulting firm based here in Akron, Ohio. If you could just do us a quick wave to let us know, or actually do a quick hello in the chat to just let us know that you can hear us. We want to make sure that we hear people. So great, we're getting some howdies and hellos. So thank you for everybody for doing that for us. And that we can obviously see our panelist who's waving to us as well. But we'll get to meet him in just a minute. So thank you for joining us. For those of you who are returning for a second or third or fourth or fifth coffee shop webinar, we welcome you back. And for those of you who are new to our coffee shop webinar series, we welcome you. Coffee shop is actually part of the .org Cafe Professional Development Series. It's a free series that our team here at .org has developed to help professionals in the nonprofit space do their jobs better. We feel it's our way of giving back, especially now when we know that funds and budgets are tight for professional development opportunities, and there are a lot of unknowns. So what we're doing as part of the coffee shop, which is our webinar series, is we're bringing on a lot of experts over the course of the last 2 months, and we'll continue to do these as we go throughout the year in different areas, just so that you can learn a little bit more about particular topic areas. The goal for these sessions is for them to be very informative but relatable, so that you get something, or at least one thing, out of these webinars for everyone that you attend. So we do our best with these webinars to make sure that we're addressing a cross-section of types and sizes of nonprofits. Unfortunately, we can't have it as it's more of a one-size-fits-all as opposed to focusing on large or small or medium-sized nonprofits. So again, hopefully you'll find a few great nuggets of information you can take with you. Quickly, for those of you who have not attended our webinars, I want to go over the format for you very quickly. Today we have one panelist and a moderator, plus we have an additional person monitoring our chat box. Only the panelists and the moderators will actually be on the screen. Everybody else will be muted and off the video. So this will just kind of keep things going smoothly. This will be a Q&A format, so I will be asking questions as the moderator to our panelists today. And we are also going to be able to answer questions that you've submitted ahead of time. And thank you to those of you who did submit them ahead of time. We certainly appreciate those questions. And then also we will be answering questions in both the chat box and the Q&A box that are both enabled as part of the Zoom webinar today. So we want to make sure that if you do have a question in the middle of the seminar, please submit that. I know sometimes people are a little nervous about submitting their questions. Just be assured that people can't see your name, so don't feel like you know, a question, you don't want your name attached to a question, and I promise I won't read your name as part of the with the question, so you will have anonymity with your questions. So feel free to ask those along the way. We will address those the best we can during the webinar. We will also have 5 to 10 minutes at the end of the webinar where we're going to be able to answer additional questions for our panelists. So if there is anything that you want to wait till the end to ask us, please do that. So today, our topic is demystifying direct mail. And so there's been a lot of talk about the USPS lately. And given that most nonprofits use direct mail to actually solicit their donors throughout the year, there's also a lot of mystery around, direct mail. What are its merits? Is it reliable? Is it still going to be something that's going to be valuable for nonprofits to be able to do? There's also a lot of rules that need to be followed if you're mailing for your appeal. So, and those rules tend to change, I think, for those of us who have been in this space for a long time. Those rules change, and sometimes they change, month to month. So today's webinar is going to focus on trying to demystify some of those rules. So I want to welcome Eric Buwala, who is from Rapid Mailing Services, and he's going to teach us some tips and tricks to make our year-end appeals successful. So before I go into Q&A with Eric, I want to do a quick introduction. So when I think of mail experts, I think of Eric. So I've worked with Eric for over 20 years now. And he is the person that is my go-to person anytime I have a direct mail question. So, and just his knowledge of the Postal Service and mailing and direct mail is always amazing. He's been involved in the mailing industry for about 23 years. So apparently I've worked with you almost the entire time you've been in this industry, which is crazy to me. But he came to he came to this industry from the tech industry. He was actually drawn home to the family business, which when he moved out, his parents started in his old bedroom. So he probably felt like, he needed to come back and recoup some of his childhood space. But all kidding aside, Eric immersed himself in every aspect of the mailing industry. He became an expert in the field and has presented at 16 national Mailcom conferences. The National Postal Forum has been a keynote speaker at several industry conferences. He was recently featured in a documentary video that was shown during the keynote of the National Postal Forum, where he and a client were interviewed about the synergy between the industry, mail clients, and the US Postal Service. He served on the board of the American Marketing Association for several years and served on the board of the Akron-Canton Postal Customer Council for 8 years, with 3 of those being the industry chair. And during his time with the PCC, he was the only person selected twice for the William B. Allward Award for Excellence in Mailing Education. So he spent a lot of time at the Postal Service headquarters in Washington, D.C., and he has a network of high-level contacts within the Postal Service. He's participated in many joint industry and Postal Service focus groups, as well as maintaining a place in the Mailers Technical Advisory Committee to help the USPS understand technical issues in the field. But when he's not up to his eyeballs in mail, he enjoys living in Canal Fulton with his daughter, fishing, gaming, and flying as a private pilot. So Eric, welcome. We're glad to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a great honor. I appreciate it.
So we're just going to start off with a real hardball question for you, because again, there's a lot going on in the USPS, but a lot of nonprofits, as we've been talking in the last couple of weeks, are getting ready for their year-end appeal. Mm-hmm. And so let's start talking about direct mail as a whole as a tool for fundraising. With social media and digital marketing, a lot of people are wondering, is it even still a popular way for nonprofits to raise money? Because many do think online and digital are going to be more effective. But maybe talk a little bit about why it's still relevant and a good way to reach donors and prospective donors.
Well, the best example I have is a client of mine that decided to go completely digital a few years back. And they instead of doing their traditional mailings for their annual fund, it was just an email campaign. And it was a horrible disaster. They almost didn't recover from it. And what they learned, which is something that I've kind of figured out as digital communications has become more relevant, is their donors will definitely go online, interface with something on the website, and give their donation digitally, but they need that physical mail piece to drive the actual donation. So, the solution that they eventually settled on was that they were still mailing out the appeal, but they saved some money by not including a reply envelope, not including the reply device on it. The physical mail was strictly to drive that digital donation. And I think that is kind of the way the whole industry has gone. Um, I bought some T-shirts for my daughter. She's quirky and weird like me, from this website, and we really like the site. We really like the T-shirts, but I get an ad from them. I get an email ad from them every single day, and it's usually at 9 p.m. So when my phone notification goes off, I know it's from this website. And what happens is after a period of time, you just start to tune that out. I know everybody can relate to that. When you go through your email inbox, there are vendors and retailers and organizations that mail you maybe every day, maybe several times a week, and you just sort of go numb to them. You don't open that email, you just delete it because you're not in the market for that product at that time. Physical mail, uh, that whole tuning things out and digital being so easy and so prevalent, it's actually increased the price or increased the value of physical mail. When you physically get something in your mailbox, you can't just ignore that. You need to actually go physically take it out of the box, look at it, possibly open it to decide what's in it, and make a decision. And you just don't have that sort of exposure with digital means of communication these days.
Well, and are you also finding, like, I mean, one of the things that we talk about here is a lot of people are starting to get weary with not only email, but social media too.
Definitely. I've seen some interesting social media advertising campaigns. I've seen some pretty successful campaigns where they've interwoven the physical mail with the digital social media campaign. But overall, I mean, especially this year, I'm sure we can all relate. It's I hesitate to go to Facebook anymore just because there's so much turmoil, and this friend likes this candidate, this one likes this candidate, and I just have sort of backed away from the whole thing. And I think most of the people, well, at least most of the people my age, my friends, have done the same thing. I actually have started a correspondence with a good friend of mine in Tennessee via the mail. We started writing each other letters back and forth instead of posting stuff, and it's been wonderful. It reminds you of that special feeling when you get a physical letter and somebody sat and wrote it, put it in the mail, and sent it to you. It has so much more meaning than the Facebook post. So I think overall, and the industry agrees, the electronic age has made physical mail more valuable to people.
So we are hearing a lot now about, funding to the post office. You're talking about the value of it, but with all of the things that are coming out in the news right now about government funding to the post office, concerns about getting mail to its destinations, what are some challenges that you're seeing with mail right now? And is it something that nonprofits need to be concerned with as they plan their year-end appeal?
Well, I think the post office is thrilled to have so many people fighting over them, but definitely doesn't want to be part of the fight. As somebody who's been deeply entrenched in the mailing industry and the Postal Service, all the news stories that I see lately just kind of have me shaking my head and occasionally yelling at the radio in the car. What most people don't know is the Postal Service operates on zero taxpayer dollars. They don't get funded by the government. They're funded by the revenue they generate through through postage, through their business. They were just recently given the ability to borrow some money from the government. And that's basically because of COVID and how that impacted their revenue stream. But the Postal Service is a self-sufficient organization. They're kind of like a private business that gets some government perks. Given that I know people are concerned about delivery time, they're concerned about mail-in voting and everything else. The jury's still out on the mail-in voting, so we don't know how much of that's going to happen. But I would not be concerned at all about the upcoming election season and/or the post office getting additional funding affecting mail delivery times. Right now, they're actually kind of more efficient than they've ever been because first-class mail volumes have dropped. So they have more people and more machines and more facilities to process things than they have mail. If there was a nationwide mail-in voting come fall, I think they would handle it pretty easily. I don't think we'd see a major impact to delivery times or the rest of the postal system.
So that's a great segue into our next question of, this is a presidential year and there are likely many other, besides the presidential candidates, there's likely many other candidates and issues, levies, other things that are going to be on the ballot. What should nonprofits be thinking about in terms of planning for their year-end appeal, knowing that there's going to be just a lot of mail?
Well, we are usually, we're pretty good at this point at predicting what delivery times are going to be based on mail volume at different times of the year. So yes, while this is, we have an upcoming election and there's going to be mailings for everything from local issues to state issues to, state candidates, the mail volume definitely goes up. The delivery time is slightly impacted, but it's something that anybody who's a mail service provider should be able to predict and help you gauge when you have to get your mailing in the mail. Generally, we try to tell customers, if it's a retail customer that you really don't want mail to hit anytime a week before or a few days after an election. And that's not really a timing thing. It's more because of the volume of mail. You don't want your message to get lost in between the 10 pieces of political mail that are in your mailbox. We actually use a service called USPS Confirm. It allows us to put an extra bit of data into that barcode, and we can actually see the individual pieces of mail every time they go through a sortation machine. So we know where it's at, how the mailing has been broken up, the distribution, and in the end, the actual delivery time. We do that as a service. It's a service we charge for. It's not very expensive, but we also do it for ourselves. Even customers that haven't elected to use that service, we may go ahead and use it on their mailing so that we have data coming back to us to see exactly what delivery times are doing, how distribution's happening, because there's containerization and how those containers get broken up. We are constantly looking at that so that when a customer has a project, we can accurately tell them, here's when we need to mail it, here's when it's going to get delivered.
So, you had mentioned when we talked, like you said two weeks prior to the election or 2 weeks after, or how would you time that? Like a week before, a week after?
I would not try to get a message into people's hands 2 weeks prior to the election. and up to a week after. And the reason is because there's a lot of last minute political mailings that are a politically strategic thing to do. They know that they're mailing it so close to the election date that not all of it's going to get delivered before the election. So you have some trail on uh, volume, I guess, is the best way to say it, the week after the election, where there's still political mailings that are arriving in people's mailboxes. So 2 weeks before, a week after, I would try to avoid, unless you're doing a political mailing.
So, and I would also say too, I mean, I'm thinking, you know, especially the presidential election year, you're probably going to have some fatigue as well from people, not just from mailing. You're going to have mail and television and social media and all these, and this
Yes.
other fatigue. So it probably would be advisable to wait until probably even a week after it even dropped to try to figure out when you want it in homes.
Yes.
Probably a good idea.
So yeah, again, the media is telling everybody the mail's going to be slow and it's this and that. And the bottom line is that the delivery time of the Postal Service, depending on the type of mailing, how it's sorted and everything else, it can be slower at times. But the important thing to know is that it's predictable, it's consistent. So even when delivery times are delayed, let's say 100% more than usual, it's almost always at a time when we know that ahead of time. We can predict it, and then we can advise our clients on when to enter their mailings into the Postal Service.
So, you know, timing of an annual appeal is one of the things that we've been talking about. In our last webinar, we talked about, you know, starting to work on your mailing lists and things like that, so that when it came time to get those, either whether they use a mail house or do things internally, how much time to work backward from, you know, getting to a mail house or dropping it in the mail or getting it to one of your mail, like how much time should nonprofits plan for their appeal?
Well, usually I get a negative number of days. They say this was supposed to be mailed last week. Because we're the last person in the chain of production. I advise my clients to basically contact me as soon as they have the idea for the project. It doesn't cost anything, and if you let me know what the goal is and what you're thinking of in terms of the print version of it, I can go ahead and give the customer back a complete timeline of if this is when you want it in homes, this is when you need to go to print, this is when I have to have a list, this is when we have to get postage, this is when we have to drop it. And many times that may be a month and a half in advance of the project, because they have to have time to create the content. It's somebody like .org to help you with your content, your message, and then physically go through the steps of printing and list cleanup and everything else. So I would say as soon as you know you want to do the project, contact your mail house, talk to them about the timeline, and get some milestones set so everything happens on time and correct. Worst thing possible, I think, for any customer is to short themselves on that process, because you've gone to the trouble of creating content, crafting a message, cleaning your mail list, printing the piece, and then you mail it late. And you end up not getting the return on investment that you should have, just because the planning wasn't there ahead of time to let you know.
And I want to speak to that too, is I think people don't realize how fast that time comes. If you actually do the math, you know, the election's in 2.5 months. I mean, we're already on the 18th of August. And if, you know, it takes 2 weeks to process everything through the mail house, and it takes a week with the printer, and then it takes you a month for content. if, you know, you have to do all your data cleanup and then, you know, get the check from your purchasing department for the postage and all that other good stuff. Oh shoot, I better start like tomorrow, right?
Yeah, we once did an election mailing of 2.5 million pieces 6 days before the election. Their candidate didn't win, but you know, it was a great example of I was happy to have the business, and we did our absolute best. I was eating Chinese food, sitting at my desk at 3 a.m. to take delivery of some of the printed material. But if they would have executed that with a little more planning, it might have been a lot more effective.
So, you know, one of the other things that I don't think people think about when they think about working with a mail house is what kind of mail can be mailed, right? You know, a lot of times you're working with a designer who has this wonderful idea and, you know, all of a sudden you're like, oh, I didn't realize that was going to cost us 55 cents a piece to mail because it's a square versus a rectangle of a certain size. So talk a little bit about design and content. How can that cause a mailing issue? And what are some things that people need to know as they're planning their appeal?
So I'll start with two very interesting cautionary tales. Postal Service came out with a program called Customized Market Mail. It allowed you to mail pieces that were die cut into odd shapes. So we had a customer found out about the program. They had a marketing company design an ad campaign for them, and basically it was going to be a series of mailers that were die cut out like a wire hanger. They printed 55,000 pieces and then called us and said, hey, we've got the printed material. Can you mail it? The way they wanted to mail it was impossible. So everything that they spent on that project was wiped out. The piece was unmailable to the list of people that they wanted with that type of piece. They had to eat the costs entirely. The second one is, I think, more probably more important. We had a customer, they mailed a catalog, a retail catalog, and we had mailed it for quite some time. They were trying out different printers, and they had a new printer, and that printer also offered mailing services. So they tried them out to mail it. The new printer took the spec stock parameters and decided to impress the new customer, they would give them a much better stock. Because they weren't experienced in mail, nobody ever thought about the weight of the piece. The customer ended up with an additional $9,000 in postage just because somebody chose the wrong stock and didn't think through the postal regulations. So now I'm not a printer. I know enough about printing in the industry to advise a customer on the basics, but I leave that to people that are professional printers. The mailing portion is my bread and butter. And I can't tell you how many times I've either seen a customer make a decision that they didn't know was going to cost them more money, or times when a customer has called me at the very beginning and said, look at this PDF. Does this work? Are all the regulations okay? And we're able to just basically with one email save the customer thousands of dollars because a certain design element needed to be tweaked or moved, or you know, the width needed to be a ½ inch longer. It's all esoteric, horribly boring stuff that has, unfortunately, no use. My head's full of it, and the only use is with my job. But it's way more complicated than you think. And you know, one of the big pitfalls that we see is people say, well, I showed it to somebody at the Postal Service and they said it was okay. Unfortunately, when we actually enter the mail, that doesn't mean anything. You can't say, well, I talked to so-and-so and they said it was all right. The rules are the rules are the rules. And unfortunately, the person that knows the rules the least is most employees at the Postal Service. Hopefully there's none on the chat today. um, you know, if I give you the wrong answer, that directly impacts my income. So there's a vested interest in me making sure that I'm right. If you walk into your local post office and show them a piece, they answer you right, they answer you wrong, it doesn't matter. They still have their job, they still get paid the same. There's no disincentive, you know, to them being wrong. So I would recommend absolutely, anytime you have a piece that you're designing to mail, talk to a mail house ahead of time before you put ink on paper, because it's going to save you money in the long run.
So the one thing when we talked, as we were kind of developing questions for this call today, I thought was a great story is, you know, you had somebody come to you and it's like, oh, this highly designed exterior envelope. And this is such a great story because I started to think about the things that I open in my own mail at home.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead and explain the story, because I thought this was fascinating. This was great.
So we had a nonprofit, rather small. The mailing was very small, but they were designing their appeal, and they had put a ton of time into what was going to go on the outside of the envelope. And they had a full color design, so expensive, with logos, and there was taglines across the bottom in color, and it had, you know, real big, like it was a rubber stamp across it that said year-end appeal. And you know, they brought it to us, and I told them that I don't think you should print it. So, you know, the customer was very vehement about, they had put all this time into it and they were positive this was the best design. And I said to them, think about when you open your mail at home. If it says on the outside of it, hey, inside we're going to ask you for money, unless you really love that organization and are waiting to give them your money, that's going to be a piece of mail that you just throw out. We've found the best way to get somebody to open the mail and to at least read the masthead, or, you know, the beginning of the letter. Don't put anything on the outside of the envelope. If you're not required to have a return address for standard mail. You can put the street address. So we might do a mailing and the return address just says 3424 State Road. And, you know, there's the permit imprint or pre-search stamp in the corner. If you get a piece of mail addressed to you and have no idea who it's from or what it's about, I guarantee you're going to open it. Now, you may open it, read the beginning of the letter to figure out, oh, is this important or not, and still decide to throw it away. But we did our job, which was getting people to open it and read the message to decide if they need to do anything further with it. So it's better to be mysterious.
Yeah, well, didn't you say the open rates on envelopes that are simpler like that are exponentially higher?
Yes, the DMA, the Direct Marketing Association, has done studies on openability, is what they call it. And the amount of time, I think right now, is at like 6 seconds, 6.5 seconds. Basically, if you can get somebody to open the piece and spend 6 seconds deciding whether or not they need to take action, it's a success. The direct mail piece has done what it needed to do. Even if the person doesn't necessarily decide to donate or to buy the product, we've got the message to them, which a poorly designed piece, you're talking about, let's say you skew the openability rate a few percentage points. Depending on what your average donation is, that could be thousands of dollars just because the piece wasn't designed to get people to engage with it. So what's on the outside of the envelope is important, but it's important to not necessarily give away everything. We want them to open the piece. We want them to have it in their hands for at least 6 seconds. And then if they decide to throw it out after that, we at least can say we've done our job and we've delivered the maximum amount of value for what the customers paid for that mail piece.
So, many nonprofits are maybe concerned about using mailhouse because they think, it might be too expensive to use a mailhouse. We hear that a lot, actually. How can using a mailhouse actually save a nonprofit money? Now, one of the things you already talked about was, you gave us a couple of examples already, but how can they actually save nonprofit money overall?
Well, it used to be, you could sort the mail yourself by hand and get a discount. Excuse me. And we saw a lot of nonprofits back in the day, now that I'm getting old, that would do that, and they'd still save some money. The way the postal regulations are today, you have to have some very expensive software to do the pre-sort of the pieces to get the discount. The technical hurdles, as well as the money, kind of mean that most nonprofits, it doesn't make sense for them to get in the business of pre-sorting their own mail. They can go to somebody like me and cut their postage in half. I would say probably 9 times out of 10, the savings we can get a customer in postage more than offset what you pay us to do it. Our services are not expensive. Depending on what you're having us do and the size of the mailing, you might be looking at 3 to 10 cents a piece. If we're saving you 14 or 15 or 16 cents a piece, then basically you don't have to do any of the work and you save money. So it's kind of a no-brainer. And we take any size customer. We have nonprofits, that might only mail 300 or 400 pieces. We'll charge them a flat, I think it's 125 now, to process the mailing, but not having to spend all that time physically putting this together when you can just hand it to somebody. It'll take us on like a 300 piece mailing. I had one customer, they spent 2 days every time they did their newsletter once a month, 2 days for around 400 pieces. They came to us. I think we ended up saving them $4 by the time when you factor in what we saved them in postage versus what they paid us. So it was only $4 less, but they no longer had to spend 2 days to do it. We could do it in about 20 minutes and have it in the mail. So regardless of the size of the mailing, regardless of the purpose, the time of year, I highly recommend you seek out a mail house. They're gonna save you money. They just will. There's no way they can't. The postage savings, the savings in terms of some of the other stuff we talked about, being able to guide you through the rules and regulations and design formats and everything else, it's really invaluable. You're going to end up saving money and you're going to have a lot less headaches.
Well, and plus, every time you run the list through the national change of address, so you're getting address updates for people, you're getting, those kinds of things. And I do know that for a particular mailing we worked on for a client with you, is we actually did a mailing where we actually had paid a little extra and had you look back 18 months because we knew we had a very transient population. So it was nice to be able to have those most up-to-date addresses for people who moved multiple times as well.
The data hygiene part actually is a great example, because we'll have customers that'll say, okay, I'm going to get you the list by Friday. I need to go through and take out the duplicates. And it's like they were going to spend all week on an Excel spreadsheet trying to take out duplicate names and addresses, trying to remove people that moved. You give it to us and it's part of our service. You know, we don't necessarily charge you anything extra for it. That list will be clean so that we know every address that's mailed is validated through the Postal Service. As you said, we run it through national change of address to look for people that have moved. Our data department will look for things like, all right, so short story. We once did a mailing of around 60,000 for a local pizza chain. We mailed it and they were furious because there were pieces that had I'm sorry, we didn't mail it. We did a second mailing for them after they did this one with another mail house. But they were furious because there were pieces that arrived that said, "Dear deceased," or "Dear don't effing call here anymore." And here what it was is employees were just entering whatever they wanted into the customer database when they got orders. And the mail house they used for the first mailing didn't screen for any of that and they just addressed whatever was in the fields. So they came to us saying, look, can you clean this up somehow? And it took us a day. It wasn't that hard, but you know, it's a great example of if you had someone with expertise, then like, because that mailing, how many people got that message and how many of them aren't ever going to shop there or buy pizza there again? You can't really put a price on that.
That's rough. Well, good. So we have a comment actually, and in our it's more of a comment than a question, and it's from a nonprofit who I know is a small nonprofit. But I think she was referring to your comment about how using Mailhouse saves a lot of money. And it says, he's so right. We started doing this about 4 years ago. So I know it's an organization that is small and that I'm sure that they appreciated using the Mailhouse. So she gave a thumbs up to that concept.
Excellent.
So, we talk about, a lot of us talk about bulk mailing. You got first class, you have pre-sort, you have priority mail, you have overnight express priority mail, you have all these rates are confusing. I mean, there's so many of them. Can you just explain what they mean and what some of them are now called, and just kind of explain a lot to us? I
think the current rate chart is somewhere around 30 pages long.
Oh, okay.
So in case you want to find it, Google Notice 123. That is the official number of the postal notice to give you the current rate chart. And it is not easy to interpret. So let me explain it, I guess, in terms of how the Postal Service works, and hopefully I won't put anyone to sleep. The Postal Service traditionally was set up so that close to 75% of their operating revenue came from first-class mail. And the model made sense because everybody wanted to have more babies. More babies mean they grow up to be adults. They grow up to be adults, they got an electric bill and mortgage and everything else. So the mail volume grew as the size of the network grew, and that kept it funded. Unfortunately, as we move into a digital age with fax and email and all the digital ways that we can receive messages, pay bills, first-class mail volume went way down, which caused a funding problem for the post office. They made some real smart decisions. They're still trying to right-size their network. Just as a little side note, during the politicization, I don't know, you know what I mean. It takes an act of Congress to close a post office. So if they have a post office that's not paying its own expenses, they physically can't close it without going to Congress and having Congress pass it in a bill. So what they did to try and make themselves viable is they restructured the pricing, which is why we've seen pricing changes every year, sometimes twice a year for the last 5 years. They've shifted that revenue stream from first class mail to what used to be called third class or standard or bulk. The current correct name is marketing mail. And the marketing mail drives the revenue of the post office. It is the future of the post office, which is great news for the audience here, because when you mail as nonprofits, you're now like the post office's best customer. And I can tell you, it used to take sometimes years for a nonprofit to get authorization to mail at nonprofit rates with the post office. I just had a customer that filled out the application and got approval within 3 weeks. And I think that's a direct result of these classes of mail changing the revenue stream for the post office. So you've got first class mail. That's the one we're all familiar with. You put a stamp on something. First class mail, interestingly, is protected by law. If you're not the recipient, it's a felony to open a first class mail piece that's not addressed to you. And law enforcement can't open any first class mail unless they have an actual warrant from a judge. It's also the most expensive class of mail. They have what they used to call second class, and now it's periodical rate, which is for magazines and periodical publications. Third class, which is what we're discussing, marketing mail, is the stuff that as businesses and nonprofits we use to communicate. And then you've got parcel service, and as you said, there's priority and overnight priority. And you know, the thing to know about the marketing mail that's important is there's not a first class mail has an actual in writing guidelines for when it has to be delivered, and the post office gets in trouble if they don't meet those requirements. Standard mail does not. Technically speaking, the post office could take a year to deliver it and it'd still be within their rules. Now, they're not going to, but the reason I bring it up is, again, this is why it's important to have somebody like me, like a mailing house, help you with the mailing, because they're going to be able to tell you based on that data we're getting back, here's how long your mail is going to take to get delivered. And we're going to be able to tell you for sure when it's delivered. So if there's follow-up calls, if there's, you know, other activities you're doing with those donors, you know when to make the call because they got the piece the day before. Did I miss anything?
No, I think we're good. We actually do have a couple questions. So I want to go ahead and get to the questions here and keep them coming. So we'll go ahead and take questions at this point. So our first question is, how long do you suggest keeping someone on your mail list if they have not donated? 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think the best answer to the question is probably one you can give, because I'm not an expert in you know, fundraising. I can tell you from a mailing standpoint, if you haven't had any contact with that customer at the 2 or 3 year mark, it's probably a good idea to get them off your list, because at 2 years, if they've moved, you won't know it. It's not going to come up in the NCOA search. So you're going to keep mailing something to somebody that potentially isn't there anymore. I would say 18 months. If you haven't had any contact in 18 months, then it's probably a good idea to remove them from the list.
I think contact is actually a really good word, because you may have somebody that hasn't donated to you in 3 years or 2 years, but they may still be, let's say, an active volunteer, or they may still be a client, or they still may be someone that interacts with you as on a regular basis. So It may be a circumstance. So maybe they have, you know, a sick family member, or they had a job loss, or there were other things that maybe prohibited them from writing a check, or they may be elderly and on a fixed income, but could still be a phenomenal plan giving prospect. So I think that before you just arbitrarily take people off a list, I think it's important to understand why. So, you know, if they just got put on a list because somebody, and I don't suggest doing this, so please take this with what it is. You know, somebody just said, let's just add all the country club list on here. So if it's somebody who never had any involvement with your organization, I would say I would go sooner rather than later. And for the others, I would certainly take it on a case-by-case basis.
I agree.
All right. We have another question. So should every nonprofit sign up for the nonprofit rate just to have it on file? And is the nonprofit permit same as having an indicia?
Okay. Actually, this comes up quite frequently. The answer to the first question is yes, absolutely. You can apply for the permit to mail at nonprofit rates. So it ties into the second question. Having a permit, the permit isn't nonprofit. I know you see in the corner of the envelope it says nonprofit, US postage paid, but your permit is just a permit. The ability to mail at nonprofit rates is tied to the authorization number you get when you're approved. Now, with that authorization number, you can mail on any permit, anywhere, at nonprofit rates. So a lot of times I have nonprofits that maintain a permit, and they don't have to. Unless you're preparing mail yourself, it doesn't make sense to have a nonprofit permit. It's costing you, I think now, $300 a year. If you're a nonprofit, you have a nonprofit authorization number, you can come to a mailer like me. I can mail it on my permit, which, by the way, saves a lot of time because it means you don't have to drive to the post office to put money into the permit account so that I can mail it. I can use your nonprofit authorization to get the discount on your mail. You don't have to really do anything. It's actually right now pretty seamless. It's a lot easier than it used to be. So you may want to reconsider maintaining a permit if you're not really using it, considering you can mail anywhere and still get your discount. But I would recommend everybody, every nonprofit here, if you don't already have a nonprofit authorization with the post office, get the form, fill it out. And even if you're not going to use it right now, the authorization is basically for a lifetime. So yes, get it. And what was the next one? Nonprofit and reply mail envelope. So again, this is something that if you're a customer of mine, we can go ahead and generate the art for you for a business reply envelope. There are a lot of rules about how it has to be designed. So I would definitely consult a mail house before you put ink on paper. You don't have to do any paperwork to do a basic reply envelope. It's called a CRM, a courtesy reply. The courtesy reply basically is letting the customer put a stamp on it to send it back to you, but you're designing the envelope ahead of time so that it's super friendly and super fast for the Postal Service. An actual business reply where it's going to be postage paid, the customer doesn't have to attach postage to it, that you will have to fill out a form and pay a permit fee with the post office. And then you pay first class postage plus a surcharge for every piece that comes back to you.
All right, so we are running close to our hour with Eric. Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up today's webinar?
I would just encourage everybody again. It doesn't have to be me. There are other vendors out there, but absolutely find one that you like, that you can work with. If they're reputable, they're going to save you money. It's going to make your whole life easier, and you're never going to know the potholes that you missed because the mail house is going to be looking out for you.
Well, Eric, we thank you so much for being here with us today. I mean, I always learn something from you every time I talk to you, and we hope that this has been fun for you as well. So thank you. So we're going to wrap up today's webinar. So thank you to everyone who joined us today. And again, thank Eric for his time. We do have 2 upcoming webinars that are going to be taking place in the coming months. Both of them are also tied to our planning for the year-end appeal. On September 1st, our team here at .org will be hosting a webinar, and actually a somewhat interactive session, a little different than our prior webinars, on planning your year-end appeal. So it's going to actually take you through helping build that timeline that Eric talked about. And then on September 15th, we're going to talk about developing dynamic content for your appeal. So those are also going to be run by our .org team. We are still planning our events for October, November. I think we're going to take December off for the holiday season. But if you have any thoughts or ideas on things that you would like to hear, topics you would like to talk about, please put those thoughts in the surveys. So we will be getting a survey from us that is going to be just asking you how we did today, what kind of information was helpful, and what are some things that we can do better. We just want to continue to make these webinars great for all of you so that you can really continue to help those that you serve. So thank you again for attending, and hopefully we will quote unquote see you on September 1st. Thank you.